I'm Debbie Zimmerman. I'm the Executive Director of Women Make Movies. And this is Tracy Holder, who works with us in our Production Assistance Program. Tracy is also a filmmaker, made a wonderful film on Joseph Papp and the Public Theater, a very important theater producer in the United States. Women Make Movies is a nonprofit organization based in New York. We've been around for 40 years. We have two programs. One is a distribution program. We're the largest distributor of films by and about women in the world. We have a number of films from our distribution program as well as our production assistance program here at the festival, including Kim Longinato's film Salma, which is screening tomorrow. We also have a production assistance program, which is much less well known than our distribution program. And that's because, there's a reason for that, because our production assistance program has been working almost exclusively with American women filmmakers for the last 30 years. And in the last year or so, maybe year and a half, we've started branching out a bit and working with a selected number, a very small number of international projects, trying to help them to access funding in the US the way that we've been working with American women filmmakers. Before I get started, I do want to say this is more of a workshop than a panel, so we want people to feel free to interrupt us and ask questions, and if you want to come up closer, come up closer. It's really meant to be a discussion with hopefully lots of information, and if there's any of you out there that have more information than we do, please jump right in. So our production assistance program started out because of something very particular that Tracy's going to talk about in a minute. And it's something which is very unique to the United States, which is called fiscal sponsorship. And it's a system whereby filmmakers are able to access grants from foundations and other sources in the United States. Because filmmakers needed to do that, they needed to work with a nonprofit organization, and they came to Women Make Movies and asked us to help. So that's really kind of the way that it started. It's grown into a very, very robust program where we have about 200 films. Actually, this year we have almost 300 films in the program because, unfortunately, one of our sister organizations, Arts Engine, folded, and we picked up the projects that they had in their fiscal sponsorship program. Again, Tracy will describe that in 1 minute. But the films that we have here in the festival, for example, that came from the Arts Engine program include Particle Fever. A film from our program is After Tiller. And I think there's one other, Anne Shun's film.
Yes, about Korea.
About Korea. Anybody know the name? Shout it out. In any event, filmmakers come to us in all stages of production, from development through to post-production, with ideas for projects, ideas they've maybe been working on, maybe have just started on, and we then work with them throughout the life of the film, helping them to raise money. We don't raise the money. That's really important to understand. We don't do the fundraising for you. What we do is give you the tools to be able to do that fundraising yourself. And in some cases, that means consultations on fundraising strategies, looking at proposals, looking at trailers. We give a space for rough cut screenings in New York. We have a series of seminars and workshops. In the last panel that I was just on, we were really talking about there needing to be more producers training. And in effect, our program really works as a kind of producers training because we see ourselves as kind of teaching filmmakers the business side of the business so that they can be the creative people that they need to be and make their films. As I said, we've been doing this for about 30 years. Every year from both our distribution and production assistance program, we've had films that have been nominated or won Academy Awards, including last year's Saving Face, which won an Academy Award for Best Short Film, and this year's Kings Point, which was in our production assistance program. We'll talk more about how we've been working with international filmmakers because it is slightly different, but I wanted to give you that sense of what our program has been. There's a great difference between the way that American filmmakers raise their money for films. Can I just get an idea if there are any American filmmakers that are here? Ha, okay, we're the only ones. Yeah, I'm amazed. I spend a lot of my time going around the world to pitching forums and markets and film festivals, and there's just such an incredible difference. And it really came out of necessity because we don't have the kind of broadcasting systems that most of you have that really fund independent film. We have two strands on all of public television that are serious about providing funding to independent filmmakers, and they've only been about for the last 15 years or so, maybe 20 years, and I've been doing this long enough to remember the days before ITVS, which actually was started by an organization that I was on the board of, the Association of Independent Film and Video Makers, because there just wasn't enough independent programming on public television. So filmmakers had to find some way of getting their films made. And the way that they did was getting grants from foundations, corporations, and individual donors. And in fact, individuals, I think now, many, many years later, there's Kickstarter, but many, many years ago, it was still true that, in fact, individual donors gave more money to films than any other source, including foundations, corporations, and the government. The numbers are really staggering, again, in the US in terms of the kinds of monies that get put into film production. And part of the reason for this is because of our tax system, because if you give a donation to a film, you are able to give the person that gave you the money a very, very, 100% tax deduction. And that's a really wonderful system. Yes?
Is that across all the states?
Across all the states. It's federal. It has nothing to do with states. It's our Internal Revenue Service, and it's part of the tax code.
How much of the money has to be spent in the U.S.?
It depends on who the funder is.
Yeah, that has to do with who's giving the money. If an individual gives you money, it doesn't matter.
But they still get a tax break.
They still get a tax break. That's right, 100%. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And it's something that a lot of people don't realize. Now, the people that you're going to be going to for money are not going to get a tax break because they have to be, unless they're Americans, unless you know people in America. So we're not really going to be focused too much on individuals, though we're happy to talk about that as much as you'd like. We're really going to be talking about foundations and institutions that have been set up to fund film. And for a very long time, we're really focused primarily on American filmmakers and have opened their doors to international projects. A lot of these foundations are very young, are very new. It's really in the last 10 years that they've come about. Before that, most filmmakers got money from foundations that were not particularly interested in film, but interested in the subject matter of their films. So, and a lot of what we're going to be talking about has to do with social issue documentary. It's actually very difficult to raise money for films that are not kind of burning issues that foundations are going to be interested in. And you'll understand that a little bit more as we speak. So before I go any further, I want to let Tracy take over and explain to you exactly what fiscal sponsorship is and how that works.
So I know we're going to be throwing a lot of information at you, and I think as we go forward, it'll start to make more sense. So as Debbie mentioned, in addition to having the privilege to work with Women Make Movies, I am a filmmaker, so I've been in your shoes, I've groveled for those dollars, and I have only had the experience of doing it through the American system. I have raised over $1.6 million from foundations, from individuals, and from government agencies. You know, we have certain governmental institutions in the states, like the National Endowment for the Arts or the National Endowment for the Humanities, that do fund films. Unfortunately for you, those are limited to American citizens. So we're going to focus on all of the rest of them. So as Debbie mentioned, we have a system in the states called fiscal sponsorship. And the basic idea comes out of what Debbie was saying before about the fact that our money given to films is considered charitable. And the only organizations that can accept charitable donations are other nonprofits, right? Nonprofits are considered charitable organizations. So I'm just going to read to you a definition that I found that I thought most succinctly defines fiscal sponsorships. That says fewer than 1 out of 10 foundations and very few government agencies are willing to consider proposals from individuals without institutional affiliation. Most foundation funding is awarded to nonprofits rather than to individuals. So individual applicants must apply under the auspices of a tax-exempt organization, that is to say, a sponsor. Affiliating yourself with an organization or obtaining fiscal sponsorship will help increase your likelihood of receiving funding. Most affiliations with fiscal sponsors are based on a written contract that spells out who will do what and what fee the sponsor will charge for their services. If the grant is approved from the foundation you're applying to, the funder's check is made out to the sponsoring organization, which in turn administers the project, doling out funds to the individual as needed, and deducting the small administrative fee as agreed in the contract. So I get a grant from an organization. Let's say Chicken and Egg gave my film a grant, which they didn't, but we didn't apply. That money would go to Women Make Movies, not to me. Women Make Movies then assumes the legal liability for it, and it is, Women Make Movies basically extends the umbrella of its nonprofit status to you, the filmmaker. Right?
Wait, I want to be clear on that. We don't actually assume the legal liability. We assume the fiscal responsibility, which is slightly different. Filmmakers retain all copyright in their film. This is very, very important. Actually, any nonprofit organization, which is also called a 501c3 organization. Some of you may have heard that. It's actually been in the news recently because there's a lot of talk about 501c4 organizations, because 501c4, 501c, 4, or C, or 3. It's just the part of the IRS tax code in the US that declares who is a public charity and who isn't, and whether or not that charity can actually lobby the government or public officials. C4 organizations can lobby. C3 organizations, of which Women Make Movies is one, cannot lobby. There are thousands and thousands of C4, 501c3, organizations in the United States, and any one of them can actually act as a fiscal sponsor. And in the US, we tell filmmakers, we do workshops like this, and we tell filmmakers, be very careful about what organization you're using as your 501c3 fiscal sponsoring organization, because if they are too closely tied to the subject of your film, there can be confusion about who's actually making the film. So if you're making a film on homelessness, and there's an organization called the Coalition for the Homeless, the Coalition for the Homeless is your sponsoring organization, they get the money, and then they say, well, this is actually our film, not your film. So there are film organizations like Women Make Movies, nonprofit film organizations, and we're one of many that act as fiscal sponsors for filmmakers. And again, it's important to be working with an organization that knows film and that knows what kinds of things should be in the contract between you and them. And you need to know that as well. It needs to say that you retain all copyright. It needs to say that the fiscal sponsor is fiscally responsible, but that they will give you the money within a certain amount of time. It needs to define what percentage fee they'll take. Universities and colleges act as fiscal sponsors in the United States and take upwards to 20%. You don't really want to pay 20%. And filmmakers, from all over the world are used to working with sales agents that take fees for presenting their films to commissioning editors. And that does make sense, that kind of fee, because they're actually working on your behalf and doing the ask and brokering the project. This is not brokering of the project. This is not us doing the ask. This is not us submitting your proposals. This is us umbrellaing. There's not really a word. Administrating the grant. Right. And also telling the funder that we will make sure that the money is spent as it was intended to be spent. Right. in the proposal that the filmmakers submitted to the foundation and in the grant agreement that the foundation made with the filmmaker. I know this is really new, it's kind of new stuff, and it's a little complicated. Yeah. Actually, there's not very many that are doing it right now for international filmmakers. There are many that do it for American filmmakers. We're going to list them for you, though. We'll give you the names of the organizations that do this. Yeah.
Can C4 do it as well, or do they have more time?
Yeah, but there would be no reason why you would want to work with a C4 organization, particularly if you want to get your film on television, because they're allowed to lobby, and it would conflict with public, at least with public television in the U.S., with their regulations about who can actually fund your project. So it just wouldn't be looked at very well.
The C4s came about after the big Supreme Court decision last year, Citizens United.
Oh, no, that's not true. Sorry, Trace.
Well, okay, but they became much more popular. They grew.
They grew tremendously,
after that.
yes.
And the films that they're making are like the Swift Boat film that are attacking candidates, like that one attacked John Kerry. So they're considered very politically driven, whereas nonprofits are apolitical in theory. I mean, obviously a feminist film organization isn't apolitical, but we don't lobby for candidates, and that's the primary distinction. Now, in terms of fees, just to give you a range, fees run from the very low end of 5% to around 8%. And generally, the larger the amount of money you raise, the lower the fee. So if sometimes fiscal sponsors have thresholds, if you raise above a certain amount, the fee will go down. And as Debbie said, there are all kinds of different fiscal sponsorships that have different kinds of arrangements. Some just pass through the money to you, take their fee, and it's quid pro quo, thanks, and that's it. Some, like Women Make Movies, is much more hands-on, offers an array of services. We really try to help our filmmakers. As Debbie was saying, we do consultations, we do rough cut screenings, we look at proposals. So you have to also decide, within the limited number of fiscal sponsors available to international filmmakers, what kind of a sponsor you're looking for. So that leads into the second point that we started to talk about, which is the difference about a contribution and a donation are given as charitable gifts, right? You want to support a cause, you are making a donation, and in the States that means that it's tax deductible, which is different from our colleagues who make the fiction films who are seeking investments. With an investment, there's an expectation that if the film is successful and if a profit is made, the investor will also benefit financially from the financial rewards of the film. With a donation or a contribution, there is no similar expectation. The foundation is giving you money, but there isn't an expectation that if you are profitable, they get profit. Now, a subtle distinction is that there are foundations that do ask for what's called a revenue share, which means that if your film is successful and you do make money, they are entitled to a small percentage of your back end after you've recouped your money. But that money then goes back. What's different between that and an investment is that money goes back into the foundation to support its activities, its mission, and no individuals are individually profiting. Whereas an investment, those people take your profits and they go to Bahamas or they buy a house. No foundation, nobody at a foundation is going to get those revenues. They're not going to have it personally come to them. And so that's the distinction, and that's why people work with these nonprofit organizations, because they're making charitable donations to your projects.
So in effect what you're saying is that the charitable donation will donate to the administrator. and then you as the filmmaker, or your company as the film production company, would in effect, if you make a profit, donate back, but to whom? To the foundation direct.
It's
Okay.
not
It's so rare.
So the
It's-
fiscal,
No,
so the
it's
fiscal
becoming increasingly-
responsibility that you talked about
right.
ends with the administration of the original donation.
correct.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's not, it's, there's a little disagreement here. We've never dealt with a funder that's actually wanted a revenue share.
Well, ITVS does.
Right, but they're not a
public-
foundation.
Right, that's
Yeah.
true. We
No,
have
there
some on
are,
the
there
list.
are, and that's, I think, the distinction that I want to make.
Right.
A foundation by its nature cannot be giving you an investment. It has to be giving you a donation or a grant, which, by the way, means the same thing, except donation is generally used when there's not a regulation about how you need to spend the money. You give a donation to somebody, you give them a gift, a charitable gift. A grant, there's always a grant letter, or generally a grant letter with very specific regulations of what you're supposed to do to fulfill the grant. There are other types of organizations that make investments. For example, ITVS is a broadcasting entity. It is not a foundation. It's actually not charitable money. It is government money, actually. It's US government money, and they are getting money from foundations, like the Ford Foundation, gives money to ITVS to fund, or it did in the past, to fund the international call that many of you are probably aware of. ITVS does, in fact, have a revenue share. Impact Partners is not a foundation. Impact Partners is an investment fund. I don't know how many of you know it, but it's one of the newer sources of funding for documentaries. And they also ask you to return, you must return the money. Once you start making money, in fact, it's similar to some other funds. I believe Puma Fund is a first in, first out, meaning that they get paid back first before anybody else. Impact Partners also gets paid back first before anybody else.
Right, just a slight subtle distinction in that ITVS, the money goes back to ITVS to be able to fund other filmmakers, right? It's not that their staff is then going to the Bahamas, whereas Impact Partners, they're going off to the Bahamas if your film is
Well, the
successful.
staff isn't going to the impact.
Right.
It's the donors. There
Right.
are people
The
that have donated. The
investors.
investors. They're not
Right,
donors. They're
it's
investors.
venture capital, and so
Yeah.
one is driven by the profit motive, capitalism, and we're taking a risk with our capital that you will be financially successful, and that if you are, we will benefit personally from this, and we're loaning you our capital with that hope. And the other is, we believe in your cause, we want you to be successful, and if you are, we want to help other filmmakers with that same money.
Yeah.
Sorry, do I understand it that these venture capital... Hello? Yes. And these venture capitalists actually don't risk anything, in fact.
No, they.
It's a 100% tax write-off.
No. You're confusing. Sorry. If we've been confusing, I'm sorry. I want to clarify that. We're talking about two separate things. We're talking about the difference between having an investment made in your film and getting a grant for your film. When you get a grant from a foundation, it's not from a foundation, but from an individual. It's a tax write-off, but you cannot pay them back. You're not allowed to pay them back. That's the whole idea, is that they are making a charitable deduction, and then they get a tax write-off. On the other hand, there is investment, and there are people that are investing in the film, and they have a tremendous amount of risk because they can very possibly lose the money. In fact, I don't think very many of them get their money back, but they're investing in the film.
I see. So the people that ask for this tax deduction, they can't share in the profit of the film?
They cannot share in the profit. Absolutely not. It's very, very important to understand. They're giving you the money as a gift, as a donation. Now, of course, the films have to be in some way educational or in some way artistic in order to fall under the rubric of this charitable scheme. So you can't really make a film about, let's see, what would be a good example? I can't make porno, that's for sure. Maybe that's the best way. I mean, it's you can always come up with a way in which a documentary is an educational project. You can actually, and we have fiscally sponsored fiction films. I don't want to confuse you more, but it's possible for a project to start out as a charitable project, a nonprofit project, and then turn into a commercial entity. For example, Boys Don't Cry, the film by Kimberly Pierce, started out getting script development money through Women Make Movies, and then was taken on by a major company. Yeah.
And just to be further clear, because I think we have confused things a little bit. So Impact Partners is actually a venture capital investment. They are looking for a profit, and it is, very clearly that. Whereas ITVS, it's called a license agreement. It's not a grant. What they are doing is they are giving you money to license certain rights in your film, and their primary interest is to get those films on public television in the US, because the money that they are offering you to use to make your film is money that comes from taxpayers. So for that reason, it is to go back to the public good, right, to benefit the public by being seen on public television.
ITVS is very similar, I think, to a lot of public broadcasting. It's just a different structure. Are there any public broadcasters internationally that get the money back as an revenue share?
Or a percentage.
Yeah.
Some, yeah.
It's a percent, yeah,
Right,
BFI.
so it's the
It's a
same
percentage
thing.
of the money. That's really, it's that kind of a scheme. But let's put ITVS and Impact Partners off to the side, because really what we want to talk about right now are foundations and the different kinds of foundations. As Tracy said before, government agencies in the U.S. will only fund U.S. citizens, so that is not appropriate for you in terms of grant seeking. Individuals we'll talk about in a sec, maybe a little bit later. Yep, was that?
If you manage to get a co-production you set up co-production, are you able to receive money from government agencies, donors, etc., without having to go through a foundation? Like the co-producer will just act as a receiver.
If you have a co-production with whom?
With an American production company, let's say, or can they then receive government agency money but they can just be the acting receiver and then you do all your stuff?
Yes and no. For most government grants in the U.S., it has to be, it's very interesting. It's not the producer that applies, it's the director. They're given for arts purposes. So if the director is a U.S. citizen, then they can apply with a British producer or with another producer, or if there's co-directors, an American and a non-American citizen, the American citizen can apply. But it is generally the director, it's not the producer. Again, because the money is coming from the National Endowment for the Arts or New York State Council on the Arts or other arts agencies. That's where the money comes from. Another place is the National Endowment for the Humanities, but that's a really complicated thing, and I don't want to
Since you can't apply for them, there's no point in wasting our time on them.
But in terms of foundations, there are in general two, and this is just the way that I kind of describe it to make it clear, think about it as there's two different kinds of foundations. There are many more than two, but for our purposes, let's think that there are two. And one are foundations that are created to support film, and the other are foundations that are created to support some sort of social issue. It can be anything. I worked in a foundation. This is a great way of explaining it. I worked in a foundation many, many years ago before I was at Women Make Movies. It was called the Clark Foundation. It was started by the family who founded Avon Products. And it was a family foundation. Many foundations are family foundations. Somebody makes a lot of money. Mr. Ford made a lot of money on motor cars in the United States and started the Ford Foundation. And his family members were probably the original trustees of the Ford Foundation. And the Clark Foundation, it was all of the family that were on the board of directors. They had 4 areas of funding. One was alternatives to incarceration. Another was the disease schistosomiasis, which is a disease that affects people mostly in Africa. Another was women and the welfare system in the United States. And the fourth, I think was something about children. So you see that they were completely different areas, and this just happened to be what that particular family was interested in giving their money to. Bill Gates made a decision that he wanted to give his money to education and some other things.
Global health.
You know, every foundation is set up with a specific purpose, and it's written into their mission statement. Now, film foundations generally fund many, many, many different subjects, but their interest is in supporting film. And this is this kind of rather new invention. It's really only the last 15 to 20 years that these organizations have come about. So when you're thinking about getting your film funded, you want to think both about the subject of your film as well as the foundations that are interested in funding film. Okay, is that kind of clear? I'll give you an example of a film foundation. Let's pick one out here. CineReach. I don't know how many of you were at the panel yesterday on funding? Oh, not many of you. Okay, that's good to know because we're going to repeat some of what was said yesterday because a lot of the foundations that we're talking about, there are people here from those foundations. We didn't ask them to be on the panel because we wanted to talk very honestly about them. And we didn't want it to skew just one particular group. We thought we could give you an overview and really talk about how you approach these places and what you need to in order to approach them. CineReach is a foundation that was started about 5 or 7 years ago by an NYU film graduate whose family, he's very lucky that his family had quite a bit of money. They fund a very, very wide variety of films. Everything from they fund fiction and documentary. Southern Beasts of the Wild. Beasts of the Southern Wild, kind of brilliant fiction film, was funded by them, as well as so many films from our
Better
program.
This World, which was out last year about the beauty pageant in India. And as Debbie's saying, there really is such an array. And just to give you some perspective on how things have changed in the States, you know, when Al Gore did Inconvenient Truth many years ago, all of the people who were working in climate change and in the environmental movement realized overnight the power of film. Right at the time the Bush administration was in power, they were questioning whether climate change was legitimate. They were saying the scientific evidence wasn't conclusive. And that film came out and overnight shut down that debate. And what we saw in the film community happen was that all of these funders who had been social issue funders all of a sudden had this aha moment of realizing the power of film to put a face on a lot of wonkish, abstract policy issues and make them accessible to large numbers of people. And so all of a sudden you had a number of people entering the film funding community who weren't the traditional funders. They were people who were coming from an advocacy base or an interest in particular issues. And so now there are a large number, in fact, there's a real dominance in the foundation funding world with a particular interest in socially driven films. And if you look at what films are getting made now, it's largely those films, and I would argue mainly because the funding, at least in the US, is supporting those kinds of films. But there are an array, and we're going to go through the different options, just so you know what your options are and who the key players are, what they're looking for, and how to approach them.
Yeah, before we get to that list, I just want to tell you, I put a list up here. These are 4 organizations that act as a fiscal sponsor for international projects. The first one is IDA, the International Documentary Association. The next one is Fractured Atlas. The third is Cinema Tropical. Cinema Tropical, I'm actually on the board of Cinema Tropical. It's particularly for Latin American filmmakers. And Arte East, which focuses on Middle Eastern filmmakers. So Fractured Atlas and IDA are kind of general. And of course, then there's Women Make Movies and we are specifically women directors. The producers can be men. We're very happy. We want men to produce films that are directed by women, but the director needs to be a woman. In our distribution program, we only distribute films which are both by and about women, but in our production assistance program, we're open to, or our fiscal sponsorship program, we're open to projects on any subject. And you can look them up online and get a sense of what their deadlines are, if they have a deadline. We have 3 deadlines a year. I'll tell you just a little bit about, I'll just use us as an example. We have a deadline on June 15th to apply. What we need from a filmmaker is a copy of a proposal. It can be any proposal. We've been telling some people here at the meat market that they can send us what it is that they submitted to Sheffield in order to get into the meat market. But, well, that's for our application. But what we're really looking for is a real proposal. And Tracy will go into very quickly the steps of what is in a real proposal. We need to see a trailer or a sample of the film. It has to be from the film that you're producing. It can't be from a previous work. So that means that you need to have already gotten to a place in production where you have something that you can show. And the reason for that is that very, very few foundations or any other entity will fund something without being able to see what it is that they're funding. We also need a budget, and we need a fundraising plan. We need to know how it is that you expect to get this film made. Where are you going to get the rest of the money? Our criteria, I'll just finish. Our criteria, the way that we choose projects, is based on, of course, the quality of the project. Do we think that the idea is important? Has there been other films on the same subject? Does this add something new to the discussion? What's the background of the filmmaker? If it's a first-time filmmaker, do they have a good support team in place? Do they have a great editor? Do they have a great producer? Do they have an experienced cinematographer? Do they have a consulting producer? We do work with first-time filmmakers, but we're looking for a strong team. And then we make a judgment on whether or not we think the film can get finished. And that's really important because we're the ones that are receiving the money from these foundations and saying to them, we think that this is a really strong project. We think that this film is going to actually get made. And I go into that, if you could just hold on 1 second, there was somebody else over there. I went through that list because these are all of the things that you need to be thinking about in terms of putting together a proposal to submit to the foundation. Those are the kinds of questions that you need to answer in your proposal. Not for everyone. Every foundation is different, is looking for something slightly different, but it's a really good framework to think about how it is that you're going to present your project. There was a question there, and then there. There.
Hi, Elisa from Toronto. So are you suggesting that we apply for the fiscal sponsorship even before we have received any grants, or would it be afterwards?
It's opened up a can of worms. In general, you have to apply before you apply for the grant. Right now, I'm kind of telling you what the process would be. We haven't opened up our the international part of the program yet, so it's on by invitation basis. You could apply to some of these places. In general, if you have a grant in hand, if you've already gotten a grant, it's a lot, then they'll welcome you with open arms.
Right. All American filmmakers will have, documentary filmmakers will have a fiscal sponsor in place because they know they're going down this path. And when you apply, it's going to be a question that the foundation is going to ask. A lot of the funds that fund international filmmakers say that they will give you a grant and then know that you will have to find a fiscal sponsor because they know it's not common. It's not the typical practice, so don't worry. They know, and organizations like Sundance or CineReach actually work with the filmmakers to help you find a fiscal sponsor if you don't have one.
Yeah, actually Sundance is one. Not every foundation requires you to have a fiscal sponsor. About half of the ones that we're going to tell you about today require you to have one. The other half don't. Right. So, you can go either way. You can try to find a fiscal sponsor and then look for the grants, or you can look for the grants and then find the fiscal sponsor. If it's not a film foundation, in general, you do need to get the fiscal sponsor beforehand. Film foundations understand the way that filmmakers work. Foundations that are interested in the subject of your film they don't have the knowledge base on their staff to really get the way that filmmakers work. It's more difficult to get money from them because they don't have that experience. Yeah, let's just move on. If you can hold your question.
Should we talk
So-
about the parts of a proposal?
Let's talk about the foundations, and then we'll talk about the
Okay.
parts of the proposal. Let's just we'll run through some of the foundations that, again, some of them are here at Sheffield, and some of them aren't. We talked about CineReach. CineReach gives fiction and nonfiction. The grant amounts range from $5,000 to $50,000. They can be awarded in any stage, from development to post-production. They require a letter of inquiry before you submit your proposal and your official application. Now, I went through all those details because I wanted to show you that every funder has different requirements, just like, sorry? Absolutely international, CineReach, yes. They're really one of the first to start doing international.
And they're very interested in international projects. Say it again?
They fund international.
Absolutely.
Why did Adela say yesterday that they're only interested in?
I work for a film festival, and we invited them to our co-production market 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was either 2 or 3 years ago. And I know that they were, at that time, primarily working with projects that were either African, Latin American, and at a reach, Balkans or Caucasus.
I would say that you probably have a better chance of getting a grant, but it's certainly not their official line that
Okay.
it's closed to continental Europe.
Okay.
Those of you who were in the audience yesterday when Adela was speaking, she certainly didn't say that. So, yeah. Again, the most important thing that you can take out of this session, actually, is to do your homework. It's the same way that you need to do your homework about pitching, commissioning editors, finding out what their strands are, what they're interested in, what they've funded and what they've commissioned in the past. Same thing with funders. Look at their list of the films that they funded. See if your kind of film shows up on that list, either in terms of style or in terms of subject matter. You'll get a very good idea if you think that it's worth the effort to write this special letter and to write the proposal for them.
So CineReach does require a fiscal sponsor, and the films that they're looking for, they're really looking for strong story-driven films, character-driven films. They care about that. That's their top priority, is that it's really a compelling, visually rich film. They like social issues, but that's not their driving criteria. And for those of you who want, their URL is basically CineReach.
Oh, we can't go through for all of them. We're gonna
Okay,
run out of
.org.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Go on. Next.
You can go online and you can Google any of the names of these organizations and you can find out a lot of them. In fact, there's a fantastic list on documentarytelevision.com. If you don't know it, it's a really interesting email that gets sent out regularly. And Bruni Burris went through a list of these foundations and described them. And I've got it right here. It's a really good list. The Sundance Documentary Fund, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of. Is there anybody here that hasn't heard of them? Okay, one person. Ask the person next to you. You have, yes. So we all know Sundance is interested in international documentaries. They don't require a fiscal sponsor.
Right.
But in our program, what we try to do is work with filmmakers to help them to craft their proposals to be the kinds of proposals that funders like Sundance are going to be interested in. Because we've worked with them on so many different projects that we have a very good sense of what it is that they're trying to do.
And they give grants up to $20,000 for development and up to $50,000 for post-production. If you've gotten funding from them, then they will also consider a second grant for audience engagement up to $20,000. And their deadline is coming up on July 8th. So if anybody is interested.
I want to go to some that you might not be aware of, because I also think that many of you are aware of the Tribeca Film Institute. Tribeca has three different grants. They've got a new media fund, they've got the Gucci Fund, and they have a new Latin American fund, which is just for Latin American films. They all have different deadlines. Tribeca sometimes asks you to use a fiscal sponsor. They gave a grant to Alma Harel. She's an Israeli filmmaker, and they asked us to fiscally sponsor it for her. She's not an American. No. Oh, she is? You think she's? Yeah, I don't. Yeah. Anyway, so they will sometimes give the grant directly, sometimes not. There's a fund called the Père Lorentz Documentary Fund, which is a very interesting fund. Père, P-A-R-E, Lorentz, L-O-R-E-N-T-Z.
He was a very important American documentary filmmaker in the 30s, and this fund is named after him to keep his memory alive.
It's administered by IDA, the organization that also does fiscal sponsorship. It's once a year. The interesting thing about this, and you may not be so interested, is that they will fund international filmmakers, but the films have to be about America. So I met today with an American and British film team that are making a film, there you are, about prison, about children in prison, and it would be a great Père Lorentz. North America, U.S., not North America. North America means Canada and the U.S. and Mexico. This is U.S. It has to be about U.S. because those were the kinds of films that he made.
Right.
Chicken and Egg is a foundation that funds women filmmakers. Again, even these foundations that are film foundations have their specialty areas. They all have their very special interests. Do you want to give details on Chicken and Egg?
Sure. I just, with Père Lorentz, their interest is in either environmental films or films that are focused on human rights, justice, social issues, and they give production grants totaling $95,000. Chicken and Egg, as Debbie said, is a funder of film, or maybe you didn't say, films by women. They're about social issues and in the environment. Chicken and Egg, let's see, first off, they have a deadline on July 1st. Oh, no, their open deadline. Their applications will open on July 1st, and the closing date is July 15th. They give grants generally between $5,000 and $25,000. The average grant is about 10. They're only interested in nonfiction, but they're interested in both shorts, features, hybrid, new media, multiple platform stuff, and civil rights, reproductive health, environment, as I said, racial and economic justice, education literacy is their particular focus. And they also offer mentorship. So if you get a grant from them, they're very hands-on. They help work with to get your rough cut, and they try to provide all sorts of services to make sure that the film evolves and to be there and supportive over time. Let's see. They work with two funds in the States, the Fledgling Fund, which is an unusual fund because Fledgling is not interested in film production. They're interested in film impact. So if you're doing a social justice film and you want that film to reach a particular audience, Fledgling will fund you to do a campaign where you partner with NGOs and nonprofit organizations working on the issue that your film addresses. So for example, there was a film in the States called Lioness, which was about women who were in the front lines of combat in the US military during the Iraq and Afghan wars. In the US, it was illegal for women to be in combat, but this film showed women on the front line, so it was irrefutable. When the women came back from the military, they wanted to apply for the kinds of medical benefits. They were suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome. Well, because technically they weren't allowed to be on the front lines, they weren't entitled to those benefits. These filmmakers partnered with all of the retired women military personnel who knew that they weren't getting the benefits they were entitled to, and the film was shown before the US Senate. Overnight, the Senate passed a bill and those women got their benefits. That is impact. It's tangible, it's concrete, getting headline news. That's what fledgling is interested in. So if you have the kind of film and you're making the film to affect change particularly, this is the kind of fund you should consider. And they work very closely with Chicken and Egg. They share offices. And
Not anymore, actually. They moved.
I thought they all moved
No,
together.
not fledgling.
Ah, okay.
They did for a long time, and they do work really closely together. It's just funny because they didn't move together.
Okay, but they are sharing offices with their third partner.
Impact partner.
Impact partner.
Right.
Do you want to talk about Impact?
No, because Impact is not a grant. So I really,
Right.
I mean, for those of you who are interested in Impact, you should certainly look at them and seek them out. But for our purposes, in terms of, well, I guess, I don't know.
Well,
Why
Dan
not?
Kogan is here from Impact Partners. If you are interested, they do make investments. They do want their money back. But the truth is that they're also just trying to get filmmakers to think more strategically and more like business people with the plan to recoup your money. And I don't know that every filmmaker they work with does that. How many films do generate a profit? But they really are trying to come up with a model so filmmakers can be self-sustaining. But that's one of the few that's surfaced in the past few years that really is driven by investment.
Catapult Film Fund is a new fund that is really great because they're one of the very few. Catapult, C-A-T-A-P-U-L-T. They're interested in funding development, which is very rare money. They want to fund your trailer. They want to help you get started on your project. They like to come in very, very early. For their purposes, you need to show that you've secured access to your subject. That's really important, that you're ready to shoot. They have 2 funding rounds per year. They'll fund up to $20,000. They just funded, there were 2 films that they funded that premiered at Tribeca. One, I believe, is here, I don't know, The Age of Marion.
No, The Genius
The
of Marion.
Genius of Marion.
Wonderful film.
And the other film,
I didn't know they had a-
it's a film that Julie Goldman produced, and Julie Goldman was just on my last panel. Oh well.
It'll come to us.
It's a great film. They do really good work. They're open for applications June 17th, and they have a deadline on August 19th, and they'll announce in October. And that also gives you the idea, this is not fast money. You know, if you want to get money from foundations, you need to think of it as part of a timeline. It can take between 6 to 8 months from the time that you put in your application to when you find out whether or not you've gotten the grant.
Right, it helps if your subject is dead. You know, my film is called Joe Papp in 5 Acts, but we usually call it Joe Papp in 12 Proposals, because I've spent obviously more time working on raising money than making the film. And I don't know if that's true for those of you who live in Europe, but that is definitely how Americans work. So the thing that you want to do is to get your proposal down so that you can plant as many seeds as possible to reach as many funders simultaneously so that your proposals are circulating, so that you're not reliant on any one funder. Because then if you, at the end of 6 or 8 months, you don't get funded, then you're really left in a bad spot. So you really want to go as widely as you can.
And by the way, you can absolutely combine different kinds of fundraising. You can combine foundation fundraising with looking for a co-production deal in the United States, with looking for co-production money in Europe, with a Kickstarter campaign, with an Indiegogo campaign, which is like Kickstarter, but actually Indiegogo, it is nonprofit, so the people that give money to, it can be nonprofit, people that give money to Indiegogo campaigns can take a tax deduction if they're American. It kind of works the same way that foundations do. Sorry, there's one question there, and then right there.
So I'm involved at the moment with making a film which is about Europe, about the crisis that's very much happening now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And looking, for perhaps development funding. Are you saying that that's always the case, that you're looking to get funding in like sort of 6 to 8 months, or are people kind of very receptive to the fact that when stories are happening now, films need to be made, or not?
Generally not foundations. Yesterday in the foundation panel, this also came up. And, you know, Cinereach, Adela from Cinereach said that they used to have 2 cycles a year, so that it was only 3 to 6 months, so that it was easier for filmmakers, but it was so much work for them that they found that they never had a break. As soon as they announced grants, they had to start working on the next cycle. So they changed to a year cycle. So it really isn't for emergency funding. It's not for, like, I need this money now. Yeah.
My question is it only the written proposal, or you have to lobby it and you have to meet the people and speak with them? Because for international applicants, it's complicated. And
Yeah.
as much as I know from where I come from, it's more the lobbying than the written proposal.
It both. I mean, it does, you don't have to know the people. That you don't. You really don't. You don't have to be in the United States. You're not in the United States. You're here. Finding somebody who's gotten a grant from these funders to recommend the project to them, meeting them when they come to events like here at Sheffield is very important. It certainly will help you. But for the big foundations that fund film, that are not film funders, you can't meet them. You almost never meet them. They work behind closed doors, and they have these proposal cycles, and you submit proposals. But you know, this is a business. This is an industry of connections and of relationships. So of course, those relationships are going to really help you. First-time filmmakers, by the way, it's also quite difficult because if they've never seen a film that you've made, it's really hard to make that leap of faith. But if you've made a film that's been on the festival circuit, that has a reputation, you've got a great idea for a next film, it's a subject that actually is going to be of interest to Americans, not just, you know, I was speaking with a commissioning editor from Germany yesterday, and she said she met with a filmmaker, and this filmmaker was telling her about a story in her home country, in this town. And she said, we have towns like this in Germany. Why do I want to know about this town in this country? It doesn't work for me. Well, it's the same kind of thing. You know, Americans come here to Europe and expect European broadcasters to fund their projects. Well, it has to be of interest here in Europe. Your projects have to be of interest there for some of these funders. For other funders, they're not as concerned about the audience. Way back there.
This microphone is really funny. I always worry, or one of the pieces of advice I give people is not to overexpose their projects necessarily in the European market, because you don't want to go in too early to broadcasters. But so if you're looking to access American funds and you are applying to 12 foundations, for example, at the same time, how much do they communicate with each other? Is that a problem?
Well, what I have found is that money breeds money, that there is a legitimating effect of getting foundation support, and that often it opens the door to additional money. And some of them actually do work together. And one of the things that was said at yesterday's foundation panel is that they do talk to each other. You know, so that we certainly find that with the films in our program, there are certain films that all of a sudden build momentum. They've gotten one grant and then they're getting all the others. Now, it doesn't always happen because a lot of these foundations, as we were saying before, are mission driven around an issue. And so then it's a question of, is your film aligned with the mission? And if you are coming and saying, I am doing the only film that is going to bring attention and make your issue accessible and relevant to a wide audience, like, for example, the film about the women on the front lines of battle, if you were a funder and your issue was women veterans, and some filmmaker came to you with that film, there's not going to be a lot of competition. You're going to jump on that film because there aren't going to be a lot of other filmmakers knocking on your door.
You know, environmental issues are a great subject for foundations because they affect the world in general, and because what's happening environmentally in England and Iceland and South America is eventually going to affect the U.S. You know, stories about the criminal justice system in particular countries are only going to be of interest if they're saying something in a very major way about international human rights or about international justice, or if there's some sort of example that really makes sense. The last panel that I was on, God Sleeps, God Loves Uganda, which is a film that's showing here, which happens to be an American film about American evangelicals going to Uganda. If that was about British evangelicals going to Uganda, it would have been of interest to funders in the US, because we have evangelicals in the US, and the evangelical movement is an international movement. So it is important to really think about what's the subject of your film, how does it relate to what these foundations are interested in, do they have any kind of track record of funding these types of films? And if they do, it's worth it. I mean, we're really just going through all these foundations that are specifically film foundations, but if you want to find foundations that are not just film foundations, there's something called the Foundation Center, which is online. They describe all kinds of foundations, and you will not believe the bizarre foundations that exist. There's one foundation in Mendocino County in California where this woman left all of her money to cats and dogs, and so the entire foundation, millions of dollars, goes to cats and dogs every year. All kinds of strange, reasons for why they fund what they fund. On the other hand, if you're looking at corporate foundations, it's oftentimes connected to the product that they're involved with. Avon Products funds breast cancer, films about breast cancer. Well, not films, but projects about breast cancer, or women's health issues, and they're a cosmetic company. So there's a connection there between them. Doing your research and finding what that foundation is about, who they funded in the past, have they funded any films, is really important in terms of your success in this way.
And on their websites, you can see who they funded, and that will give you a sense of what kind of films are your film anyway aligned with what they're doing. And for the woman who mentioned that she was doing the film about the European economic crisis, if you are doing something that's timely, even though the process takes a long time, one of the things you really need to do is to emphasize the urgency of your film. Because if you think about it, the foundations are deluged with more applications than they can possibly fund. And there are so many compelling films that are being made. How are you going to differentiate your film from every other film? Well, one way is to say, this film is needed now. And this film has an urgency, and to make the case of why it is urgently needed now, so that if they're looking at your film and another film that is about an important subject, but it isn't one that could be made in another year and it wouldn't matter, but your film has to be made now because we're looking at the issue now, right? WikiLeaks, timely film. You want to add urgency to your proposal. Anything that makes yours the one, you're trying to sell your project above every other project that they're looking at, and making it timely and making it necessary now is really key to your success. Relevance is a key variable.
I'm just trying to put up the names of some of these funds that we mentioned. A couple that we haven't talked about yet are the Women in Film Finishing Fund, which is based in LA. It's also for women filmmakers. It's not just documentary. And they have special grants as well as general grants. I think they have one funder that's interested in disability, so they give grants on disability, but they also have just general grants. It's only post-production though, and it's really helpful if it's kind of your last money that you need. CAM specializes in Asian American projects. I guess they fund Asian, because it's part of PBS. It's actually
yes, that's right.
They're part of
public
PBS.
Television. They're for American Public Television. CAM stands for the Center for Asian American Media, but they're interested in international filmmakers. They obviously want films that have an Asian or Asian American component, but they're looking for films that appeal to a wide audience. They're looking for projects for post-production funding for a broadcast hour, which in the States is 56 minutes. And if their funding ranges between 20 and 30,000. If you get their funds, and as Debbie said, it's to finish your project, you are then have to give them a broadcast master, and the understanding is they will then try to get it on American public television. The deadline for that has passed for this year, but you can check out their website. The Women in Film Finishing Fund gives up to they provide small cash grants of up to $15,000 and in-kind services. And they are looking for films that have completed 90% of principal photography and have a rough cut at the time of application. They're interested in both short and long formats in all genres: narrative, documentary, educational, animated, experimental. And what about ITVS? Should we talk about that?
We'll just go through ITVS really, really quickly. ITVS does have an international call, although they're making a lot of changes. They do fund international filmmakers. The projects have to be by non-American filmmakers. Is it close? Yeah, that's...
No. I checked with Claire this morning.
You checked with Claire?
It's on their
then
website.
please,
It's
if you
up to
check with Claire this morning.
$100,000. If you look at their website, which I did last night, they are going to change it. And so if you're looking at ITVS, I encourage you to apply immediately. Right now it's on a rolling basis, but they are going to change it, and I think it's going to become a commissioned system. And so since that is a major source of funding, I encourage you to consider it now. ITVS, by the way, on their website has several resources. They're sort of hard to find, but know they're there. One is called Inside the Jury Room, which takes you inside their process. And another is what a treatment for ITVS should look like. Just to go back, ITVS is under the umbrella of something called the Corporation for Public Broadcast, which is a quasi-government, quasi-private fund. But because it's quasi-public, it has taxpayer money. And therefore, the films that they fund, the intention is that they go to public television. And again, ITVS is going to give you a license agreement, they're not a grant. And the license agreement is basically obligating you to allow them to try to put your film on public television in the US for some amount of time.
Yeah, it's a broadcast agreement.
Yep.
Kind of plain and simple. And the one thing that's interesting is that it cannot be about America. It has to be about subjects outside of the United States. And the filmmakers can't be American, which is really good for you. Most of the money for that project actually doesn't come from CPB, it comes from the Ford Foundation. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's changing. Now, the Ford Foundation also funds films. They have a project called Just Films, or a program called Just Films, and they fund films in that program. However, for international filmmakers, you need to go to the regional office of the Ford Foundation. You can't go directly to the Ford Foundation in New York. If you get funding first from the regional office of the Ford Foundation, it's then possible to get into the Ford Foundation through them in New York, and you might be able to get additional funding. And the Ford Foundation has offices all over the world, in Cairo, Nairobi.
Unfortunately, none in Europe, oddly enough. Johannesburg, New Delhi, Beijing, Hong Kong, Jakarta, Lagos, Mexico City, Santiago, Rio de Janeiro, Nairobi, and Beijing. So unless you're thinking of moving, or unless you are bi-continental, I think Ford is difficult, which is a shame because they're a great funder and they're interested in social justice films. Should we go into Gucci a little bit, or some of these, the difference between the Tribeca funds? Or what would be helpful to you? Do you want to know more about
why don't we open it up to questions, and you can ask us to go through more funds, to talk about what you need to apply with, or whatever. No questions. Sure. Now, here we go. Just took a second to get in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't shout. Before, quite a while ago, you were talking about how you can help with proposals to Sundance or other similar places. And how does that work? Is that under the production assistance?
For us, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, as Tracy said before, I really want to stress that there are amazing amounts of resources online. And most of these funders will have information on their websites. Some of them have sample proposals, sample budgets. They'll give you a very good idea of what they're looking for. On the Women Make Movies site, which is WMM.com, we also have really extensive resources. All of these organizations, we have a list of those and many other. I think the mic went down. Yeah. We have a list of those and many other funders that fund social issue media. We will, yes, in our program, we do critique your proposal. It needs to be, I will say though, it needs to be a proposal. It can't be a treatment. In Europe, you're used to putting together a treatment for broadcasters. That's not what a proposal is. A proposal is generally 3 to 5 pages. It could be up to 10 pages long. It has a statement of need. Why is this project needed? What is this project about, which could be a kind of short treatment. Who is going to see this film when it's finished? Who are you making it for? How are you going to get the project funded? Do you have any funders already?
Also, your visual style, how are you going to approach this visually? Who are the people involved? And now, because there is more and more interest in this impact side of things, in addition to a distribution plan, there is also, many of the social issue funders want what's called an engagement plan, which is how are you going to reach the intended audience if it's about a particular issue. And now the expectation is that you will be building partnerships with those organizations who are interested in using your film as a tool to further their own mission. And so funders want filmmakers now not just to make the film, but to really be involved in the distribution side, right? We see that now through DIY, and also the impact side. And again, the thing I would stress with a proposal is that you really want to be able to talk about the macro and the micro. You want to talk about the big themes that are universal, but then show how, through the particular story that you're telling, you illuminate those larger themes. But if you just talk about, at a filmmaker from our program pitch at a festival in Brooklyn last week, and she's making a film about the fires in the Bronx in the 1970s. And it's an amazing project because in the 1970s, New York was almost bankrupt. And what happened was that because we were, austerity in Europe, we were in financial crisis in New York. And so what did the government of New York do? They started closing firehouses in neighborhoods of poor people of color. What a shock. As a result of that, there were fires all over the Bronx because there weren't fire stations to approach them, and it was a phenomenon. Well, we're in that moment now. New York is under enormous economic stress, and the people that are being hit right now are also the same poor, disenfranchised people of color. This filmmaker only told her story about that moment in time, but didn't link it to the present and make it relevant to our lives now. No funder is going to fund a film that is just a historic relic. And so with your films, you have to look at what are the universal themes to be able to present right up front why this film is going to reach a wide audience beyond the particulars of the story you're telling. And again, the thing I said before about urgency, that this is a timely story, it's relevant to the world we live in, is key to making your proposal stand out. We spend so much of our time reading proposals from filmmakers, and after you've read 100 proposals, you see which ones stand out. And I think the ones that achieve what I've just said about the universality, that can make their characters sort of flesh and blood, that I could imagine meeting the people, make them come off the page, make them visual, are the ones that really succeed. What are the things that you think make a strong proposal? Are there?
Make me laugh. No, I'm joking. No, again, for me, it's about being able to say, I think this film is going to get made. And I think that the people who are making the film are the right people to be making the film.
Right.
And they've done their homework. They know what films are out there on the same subject, how their film is different to those films, and they have a realistic budget. And there's 3 things that I look at in budgets that tell me if the team is on the mark. One is the amount of editing time that they have. Oftentimes it's too short. Another is rights clearances. Have they actually put in appropriate figures for rights? And the third is what percentage of the budget is going to producing and directing fees as a percentage of the total. So those are the things that I'm looking for. I want to get some questions right here in the front, and then we'll go to the back. Quickie.
What is the percentage for you?
What is the percentage? It
From the
depends on the
budget
project. It depends on how big the production team is. I don't want to see a project where half of the budget is going to producing and directing fees, and I do see projects like that.
25% is considered acceptable of your budget for your personnel.
Okay, in the back, whoever gets their hand up highest, and I'm short, so yeah, this lady here.
Hi, I'm Sophia. We're making a film in Bosnia at the moment. We've filmed for about 9 weeks since last year, December 2012. We've got some major developments happening in our kids' lives who we're following in July. We've run out of money.
Yeah.
My question is, have you got any advice on emergency funds?
It really doesn't happen. I would say go to Kickstarter. That's what I would say. Kickstarter is your best bet.
We did an appeal on Indiegogo.
Yeah? How'd it go?
Okay. I don't think we know enough wealthy people.
You don't need wealthy people on crowdfunding. Actually, what you really need to do is you need to know social media, and you need to get young kids to help you build your audience out.
The thing is, the nature of our film is quite sensitive, so we didn't want it going out on Facebook until we had spent more time with our characters. Some of their
that's a problem.
Yeah, so we've kind of not been able to use that so much as we would have liked.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the only suggestion I could make, and I actually don't know if they've funded international projects or not, is there are some church groups, like there's actually the Universalist Unitarians, who are kind of amazing and fund women's projects. I don't know if it is.
Could you repeat that?
The Universalist Unitarians. There are some other church funds that tend to operate on a quicker cycle, but in general, if you want emergency money, as we said before, this is not the way to do it.
Okay, thanks.
Let's go to another question. This gentleman here, and then in the back. Sorry, I keep on making these poor people run around the room because I like going around the room.
Yeah, somewhat different approach to this. On a strategic level, I'm working in Eastern Europe. It's a very compelling area with lots of compelling stories, and it's very, very hard to provide the stories to make them accessible to others. And let's say one would like to arrange a seminar, for instance, about it, bringing in somebody like you or somebody else, and get funding for such a seminar for persons to actually, let's fly to, in my case, to Vilnius in Lithuania, to talk more specifically and meeting the filmmakers, and actually create awareness, know-how. Yeah. Are there any such opportunities? What would you?
Believe it or not, I know this is going to sound really strange, and forgive me, but the U.S. State Department actually does fund things like that. I mean, I've been to Poland doing workshops with filmmakers in Poland. I was just in Chile a couple of months ago, and yeah, I know it's a very strange idea, but the State Department changes. We have terrible presidents and okay presidents. Right now we have an okay president, the State Department's okay. So, Even
now after all the budget cuts?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. They still fund, there's something called I am an American Film Ambassador this year, And there's a program that they do through UCLA where they send American filmmakers all over the world with films. And they're actually really good films. They're not just like propaganda bullshit. They're the kinds of films that are showing here in Sheffield. Yeah, it's our own little way of propagandizing independent film.
And just one other suggestion I want to make broadly in terms of looking for likely funders is one of the things that I always do is I look for films that are similar in nature to my film. I don't watch the film. I go to the credits at the end and I look, because they have to list who has funded them, and I look at who funded them and I write them down and I go to those funders, because then I know two things. I know, one, they fund film, and two, they're interested in my subject. So that's a good, one of the first things I do when I start a project.
Oh, by the way, you should, to the gentleman there, the IDFA fund funds what used to be called the Joris Ivans, which is now the Bertha Fund, the IDFA Bertha Fund. Could you say that again? IDFA, IDFA, the International Documentary Film Festival in Amsterdam. The Bertha Fund, through IDFA, funds film organizations. I don't know if they fund Eastern Europe. I know they fund the South and the East. But it depends on the country.
And that's one to go to the Foundation Center for, to online look for grants.
Yeah. All the way in the back, the person who had their hand up.
Oh, is that me?
Yeah.
Oh, right. You talked about budgeting appropriate figures for copyright and things like that. I've done budgeting, but all for in-house. I worked for BBC for so many years. I don't. Where is a good resource to get good figures for copyright funds? What you were talking about.
Sure.
Where can I find out more about that?
It's actually really hard to find funders who will fund that. And
no, she's not. She's asking for how much should she budget for?
Oh, how much should you budget? Oh, as to how much it costs to license. That's what you're asking. Right.
Outside, in-house, where do I find
It really depends on the project. I just did the most ludicrously rights-intensive film. The subject of my film did this play Hair and a chorus line, so clearing those shows has been challenging. If you go one thing that we also are encouraging filmmakers to do is to claim fair use and to explore whether your films have a fair use potential. Is that a concept that you're familiar with?
Yeah, I would do that in news.
Okay, well, if you're interested in that, there is, and this is just a great resource generally. The Center for Social Media in the US has a fantastic website, and they've been the big proponent in the US for using fair use. And on their website, under resources, they have a wealth of information about using fair use and ways to go about that. If you're negotiating music, right, because you're having to clear the rights for clips, photos, and then for music, the thing that I actively encourage you to do is an MFN. Is everybody familiar with that term?
No, I don't even know what that is.
Oh, okay. A Most Favored Nations agreement is an agreement you can strike specifically for the music in your film, where all the participants in music licensing agree to accept the same fee. And so in my case, and you create the term. So in my case, we created 3 levels. One was for music excerpts that were 2 minutes or less. One was 5 minutes or less, and one was anything over 5 minutes. And there was a fee for each of those 3 categories. And MFN means that every licensor has to agree to those terms so that nobody is getting more than anyone else. And that is accepted in the US, and it's the best way. We were able to strike an amazing deal, but it was a lot of work to get all the participants. So you start with the easiest ones, and then you go to the hardest ones and say, look, everyone has agreed, we just need you. No one's earning more than you would be, and they often will agree to that. So that's a thing to consider for music.
It's time for like one, maybe two more questions. Way in the back.
Yeah.
That lady.
Sorry. Thank you. The session has been very informative so far. My question is about a film I'm developing that's based in the UK. So the situation and the characters we're following are based in the UK. Can you recommend any fund that will consider, funds in America that will consider UK-based projects?
But what is it about?
Well, I would say broadly, it's looking at criminal injustice. And so, things like police, stop and search, issues that, some universal issues, for sure. I mean, certainly if we start considering what's going on in Europe in terms of Sweden and so on. So it's
As long as you can frame it in a way that an American funder can see yours as the definitive film on the subject. So, for example, I'm active with a good government group in New York, and stop and frisk is the issue we are exploring right now. If we knew somebody was doing a film on stop and frisk, even if it were in the UK, but we could learn lessons from it in the US, that is absolutely, we get so many great films from the UK that are looking at large social justice issues. As long as you can make the case as to what you have to approach writing a proposal or approaching a funder from their shoes, not this is what I need, but what is it you are offering them something, right? This is a valuable film because it will start the conversation on stop and frisk or on how police interactions with disenfranchised communities. And this will either start the conversation or will shift the paradigm or somehow shift the discussion. If you can make that case, then what you are doing is you are doing something valuable that they should want to fund. And it's trying to find the alignment between their needs and what you're doing and trying to frame it in such a way so that it's easy for them to see how your film serves their mission and what they do. And that's how you want to articulate it when you're writing your proposal.
But the really important thing is that it has to be something that is going to be of interest outside of England. You need to think about whether or not your project is truly international, Because
no, but what does that, sorry, because I kind of know what that is, but what does that mean really in terms of, I know the universal issues. So for example, we do have stop and search issues, we have police, what's the next level that would make an American,
I think what Tracy said before about, is there something innovative or new in the way that it's being dealt with here that can teach us all more about the issue, that really frames it in such a way that, look, you don't want to see a film about something that's so particular to the US that it has no reverb here, You just have to think about it kind of both sides of the ocean. And I would look at foundations that were interested in criminal justice.
Right.
But again, it has to add something to the discussion.
I can give you an example. The mayor of Medellin in Colombia noticed that there was a huge amount of crime by youth. And he decided, I don't know how he came up with this plan, that the reason that there was so much crime was that because youth had nothing to do after school. And he thought that if there were more parks, youth would have a destination after school. And so he started a program and created all of these public parks, and lo and behold, the crime rates in Medellin went down significantly. Well, in New York, that's a problem. Everybody thought parks, right, there is something universal about that. That program he started now, he travels all over the world teaching municipalities how they can reduce their youth crime rates by creating green parks. If you can show something that is a community that is doing something innovative that we could all learn from, that could easily be transposed to other communities, that will make it universal.
And unfortunately, this is going to just be we've run out of time. I don't want to leave you with the idea that you have to come up with solutions for Americans.
Yes.
You don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be an innovative solution, but it has to be a new look at something, and it has to be an issue that goes beyond its own community. You know, just one last, like for example, I won't even go into any examples because I'm getting it's time and it's over. We hope that you've enjoyed and learned something.
We hope you all get funded.
And we hope you all get funded, and best of luck with your projects. Thanks for coming.